It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next guest, Gretel Colleen, who will be hosting our panel discussion, which will go for about an hour. And I'm sure many of us will be very familiar with Gretel, who is well known for so many things. When I had a look at all the things that Gretel's done, there's a very, very long list. Most of us will know that she's a TV personality, a well-known social and political commentator, a regular columnist for the Australian and the Sydney Morning Herald, and that she's written more than 20 books. In fact, there's a new one coming out soon, I believe, which is The Zebra Who Lost Its Spots, which is for adults, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And I haven't even mentioned Big Brother, right? So that's the least of the achievements, I would imagine, because there's so many other things that Gretel has done. What I would say, though, is perhaps less well known, is that in 2015, Gretel was actually appointed as Australia's first female Minister for Men. Did you know that? Can I just say, not seriously though, but you are in for a treat if you haven't watched the series. Go onto YouTube, there are 4 episodes, there should be more. Right? And you can tell I'm a fan already. I want to know where the other ones are. But anyway, seriously, if you haven't watched The Minister for Men, watch it. Great, very entertaining. Now, on a more serious note, and perhaps still less well known, is that Gretel has been very active in humanitarian work, including being a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for 7 years. She travelled to Pakistan for the Fred Hollows Foundation. She also created a documentary on AIDS orphans in Zambia, and she's performed for troops in Iraq, Egypt, Afghanistan, the Solomon Islands, East Timor, and she's also a Pink Ribbon Ambassador. And I have no idea what you do in your spare time, but I would imagine nothing because you don't have any, right? Anyway, Gretel will now be hosting our panel discussion. So please join me in welcoming Gretel. Do you want me to also introduce our panellists as well, or am I going to leave that to you, or should I ask our panellists to come up now? That would be a good idea.
Yes, you're more professional than I am.
Right, so the first person that I'm calling up to the stage is Renee Hayden, who is the CEO of the Australian Primary Mental Health Alliance. So please welcome Renee as she joins us on the stage. Also, a huge welcome to Jackie Moore, who we met earlier from Lifeline Macarthur. Also, Alessandro Donna DeMarchi, who spoke before on the Consumer and Carers Our Experience Matters Committee. We also have Simone Tribbleton from the New Access Service. Where's Simone? Yeah, that'd be great. And also Chris from, round of applause for Simone. And also Chris Jones from the PHN will be joining the panel as well, so huge welcome.
Thank you, Sharon. Now, I was going to sit there snugly, but I don't think we've got enough mics to share, do we? So I'll just stand here and suffer. Don't worry about me. Okay, so I've just driven here. I'm completely thrilled to bits to be here. And of course, you all come from diverse organisations with diverse experience. And I am very keen to hear this panel with their general overview. So, after this, I will be chatting and elevating your spirits and changing your lives. But we are going to start with our panel, okay? And we did have the Ask It basket, which is the best name ever. Is that just unique to here? Have I been living in a hole? Does everybody have an Ask It basket? It's gorgeous, isn't it? Look, we have our spokesperson here. I won't trust him, I haven't got a clue who you are, but whatever. She's got an honest face, I'll trust her. So, I'm Gretel, we know the panel. Now, there is a slight issue we have to deal with for me, which is I'm just not good with rules and facts, and one of those facts would be everybody's name, which is why on Big Brother, everybody wore a name tag, because I just would never. Do we all mind? We won't actually video this, if that's okay.
Yep, we're on.
Are you with one of the speakers?
No, I'm just taking photos.
Cool. Sorry to say that it's a little bit You do what you want, but I will underperform. Okay. So with Big Brother, that's why they had name tags, because as soon as I look at someone, what we think is that I'm psychic, and I channel relatives and dead people of the person and therefore call them the wrong name. So to avoid that situation, let's have a quick roll call.
Chris Jones.
Renee Hayden.
Jackie Moore.
Alessandra.
Hi, Simon Triple10.
Now Simone is filling in for us because we had a sickness on the panel.
That's
Are
right.
you nervous or you're all right?
No, I'm fine.
All right, now the way we're going to work, because you guys have had a long and information-filled day, is we've got 10 questions and we've got the Ask It basket where, I don't know, you were all a bit substandard, we only got 2 good questions out of that. Now I don't know what that problem was, but maybe lift your game for next time, okay? We'll have to have a question asking session next year. But I presume it's because everything was so comprehensive that you have no more, is that, so there's another honest face. Imagine if I looked here and you all had dishonest faces working in this industry. Oh my, you're nodding away. That's good. And the men, welcome to the men. Often I perform to men whose arms are which means you're not getting anywhere near me. Obviously, it's because they're very attracted to me and I'm trying to block that attraction. And sometimes it comes across a bit more aggressive as than that, but I interpret it in a very kind way. Now, so we're doing Q&A style, which, and I'm one of the few people here who's actually been on Q&A. Would that be right? And I would say I've been on, I don't know, I'm prone to exaggeration, but at least hundreds, maybe thousands of panels, and that one is the most intimidating because everywhere else you're just allowed to chat on. Tony Jones is like a big boss boots, and I felt like a complete nut of git on that show, so you'll probably be asked back. And it was with Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten, so the whole thing was just fraught, and I was there for light entertainment. Can you imagine how pathetic that was? So this will be uphill from there. No, this will be, we're on the summit now. Chris, you look like you're bubbling like a little volcano. Shall I ask you the first question so we can get... Oh, now that's a slight problem. I didn't bring a watch that works. So you be time. Sharon, you be time. Sharon, you've got a... Oh, I'll use my phone. I'll use my phone. And if any calls come in, you don't mind. People don't realise, and I think this is one of the really interesting things when we do talk about mental health and expectations and societal pressures, that people like me who appear to be so organised in life, it's basically just smoke and mirrors. Okay, 3:10. 10 questions, 50 minutes, 5 minutes each, really one because we're going to interact. And, are we ready? Chris, may I ask you a first question? He wrote the question. So let's see if he knows the answer. Could you give us, what we'd like is an I'm praising it here. We will need an overarching view of the day. Can I throw that ball to you?
Absolutely. So, I guess to start off with, we really wanted the concept of the step care approach to resonate with everyone here today. And just in speaking with people throughout the day, it definitely sounds like that's the case. So it's a matter of just making sure that there was a general awareness that there are a range of new services in the area that can meet a range of needs and that have been done with South Western Sydney in mind. So I think we're very proud of the fact that at the PHN that we spent the time that we did in working with you all on co-design. A vast majority of people here in the room were a big part of that co-design. So hopefully you can not only see your voices and your opinions in those services, but hopefully you've been an active part of now referring people over to these new services as well. The other thing that I'd say as well that I've spoken to a few of the presenters about today, and again we're incredibly proud of, is just the fact that we've heard from so many presenters today saying, you know, what the process of working with the PHN has actually been like. Because again, we're we're really fortunate to have the commission providers in place that we do. They're people that just don't understand the, not only the evidence base behind the programs that have been funded, but have absolutely got a passion for what they do. And I think everyone here would agree that that's come through loud and clear today. So again, we've wanted to communicate the fact that that there are tailored approaches, there are specific groups that are now catered for. We've heard some brilliant descriptions of that today. Just to mention a few. Lynn's presentation about what they're doing in regards to working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations is really innovative stuff. And again, we're fortunate we have that in the region. Just before we heard about new access, which again is a really new approach, and the evidence already is quite overwhelming for a program like that, with recovery rates of over 70% for people that have been part of that. People that now might not need to go forward and access more formal clinical supports. If they do, we know that we've got services in place ready to go, be it things like You in Mind, or other things for people with severe mental illness that Renee will speak a little bit more of, either through credentialed mental health nursing or potentially other psychological therapies for people with severe mental illness, which we've currently got up as a request for proposal. So I think it shows that we do have services that go across the board. We are ready to meet those needs at a primary care level, and we've got the right stakeholders and services in place to work with. So I think that it's all sort of positive things in that respect. And again, can't reiterate enough how proud we are to work with all of the services, and likewise the stakeholders and other members of the community that have come along today.
Thank you. Perfect. Big tick. Okay. Now that was very good. Now, Alessandro, have you got access to a microphone?
I do.
Now, does everybody know you?
Do you?
Yes.
Would you like to put yourself in
Context.
In context?
Sure.
Yeah.
My name's Alessandro. I've worked as a youth and advocate for mental health for quite a few years. I'm 24 now, so less of the youth side, more of the advocate side. I've got lived experience with depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts as well from when I was younger, and that's kind of propelled me into what I do today, talking about this stuff, awareness raising, bits and bobs, that kind of thing.
Perfectly done. Okay, so question here, if you don't mind me reading it, a la Tony Jones. How has the lived experience perspective helped shape the newly available services?
So I gave a presentation on this earlier in the day, so if you were there, I'm sorry for repeating myself a bit. But really what has been important, so for those of you who don't know, the PHN has a group called the Our Experience Matters group. So it's a reference group made up of consumers and carers giving input onto projects, plans, initiatives, etc., etc. So it's a pool that they can draw on to get feedback for things, get new ideas, input. And for me, and it's not just because this symposium's hosted by the PHN, but it's been done extremely right. There's a lot of ways you can stuff up consumer care involvement, but for every aspect of what the PHN has done in this, they've done all the right things. And the reason I say that is because every stage that we've been planning on, we've got a lot of involvement and feedback from it actively throughout the whole time. So we consulted at the initial stage, which is something that's really important. A lot of the time, consumer involvement can be box ticking, especially if, when the organisation gets bigger and bigger. It can be something which you need to cover in order to meet particular criteria, and what you end up with is tokenistic involvement, and you're not getting actually what you can get out of it correctly. And so when my involvement with the PHN and the others in the committee, we are involved in the initial stages. We're made to feel a part of the team. And ongoing from there, the projects that we've had input on come back to us at different stages. So they're brought back and they said, this is how it looks now, how's that? And we can tear it to shreds, or we can give a lot of kudos to it. And that's really important because if you're setting up a reference group or advocacy group or a pool to draw on, you want those people to be consistent, involved, take ownership of the projects, and not to disconnect, because they're a vital resource. They're the people who have and will continue to use the kind of systems and plans that you're putting into place. And if they feel like it's not right, there are thousands of other people out there who will feel the same. As for the evidence, I guess, of seeing that, it's been a really interesting experience to have had input on very ground level, bare bones things and said off the cuff comments and had input. And to have seen the final project and reading a line or a bit in there and you go, oh, I did that one, I said that, you know, and you feel this sort of like, the initial stages coming to completion and you know that what you've said hasn't been dismissed because, you know, you don't have a diploma or you know, clinical experience. And for anyone here today who's either consumer or carer, I would say definitely try and get involved. If you know of any groups that are forming like that, they can be really, really enriching experiences for you to use your negative experiences as a catalyst for doing good. They're a very structured environment where you can be guided by the kind of people who know how to navigate systems and take your input and make a difference with that input. And for any organisations, I would say definitely look at forming a reference group or a committee like that if you haven't already. They end up being invaluable. It's a treasure trove of things that you don't even really think of. And the amount of times where, again, I've said something just offhand and people have turned around and gone, I have not thought of that. And I'm, okay, great, let's do it, let's move forward. So yeah, that's my experience with the PHN committee has been excellent, and hopefully the input that we've had already can continue and keep growing the great things we're seeing in the community.
Thank you, Alexandra. Do any of you have a comment to add there, or about the importance of everybody's actual first-hand experience assisting where you're going and what you're defining? Does anybody want to add to that, or wait? No? Simone, you look like you've got something you want to say.
No. I spoke just before, so I might be quiet this time.
That'll be useful on a panel, thanks, Simone. I mean, you look good. All right. Well, we'll ask you a question outside of this industry later. No, it just reminds me, not Simone, but we were talking on Sunrise the other day. There was a survey that came out about people not going to their GPs, they were going to the hospitals. Did anyone see that? And the coverage of it was that 2,000 people, you've got to survey 1,000 people, something for it to be valid, and your area for error is whatever it is, 3.5% or something like that. So they went through this whole thing with the survey, and the upshot was, yes, these people are going to the hospitals instead of going to their GPs. And we were talking on the panel about what we thought about that. And all I could think of, why would that be so? Why would they be doing that? Why didn't they ask that in the survey? I mean, wouldn't that be bloody obvious? Okay, you're not at the GP, you're here at the hospital, why? So there we are, sitting on a panel, talking about why these people, which is really the first-hand experience we're talking about. Because sometimes people are embraced for these things from really theoretical, intellectual, political, bureaucratic levels that actually don't ask the bleeding obvious, do they? So thank you, Alexandra. All right, next one. Jackie, where are you? Are you ready for your question?
I'm ready.
Okay, now I think you've been briefed on this, but do you mind if I read the whole question?
Go for it.
Because, you know, I make things up otherwise. Suicide remains a nationwide problem which affects individual families and communities. Is there a specific approach to suicide prevention in southwestern Sydney, and what is available as part of this support?
I did have a comment for Alexandra actually because.
Oh, now you
yeah.
Well, sorry, you missed that one.
No, I've got the microphone.
Oh, and hers is bigger than mine. All right. Go far away.
He's actually been an integral part part of our MacArthur Suicide Prevention Network and challenges us older people that are on the network with his input, which is great. Back to the question though. We know that there's going to be 8 families who wake up this morning and will be mourning the loss of a loved one. 8 families who will be mourning the loss of a loved one tonight to suicide. 6 of those families, they'll have their men taken. 8 people a day just isn't good enough. 3,027 people in 2015, and we know the suicide rate is increasing. So when we had our co-design session on suicide, we wanted to have a look at, it is a community issue. It's not an individual issue, it's a community issue, and how do we address that as a community? We have set up a MacArthur Suicide Prevention Network, and thanks to the PHN funding, we're rolling that out right across southwestern Sydney. Through that, we'll be looking at means prevention and restriction, which is part of that. A huge part of this is also training and education. And just people understanding that it's okay to ask the question. It's okay to ask someone, are you thinking of taking your life? Are you thinking about suicide? When they're going through a really tough time. Now at Lifeline, we ask every caller. If they're not, they'll say, oh no, and you can move on. But if they are, there's almost a sigh of relief that someone's heard them, because there's usually some clues there that that's what they're thinking. So asking someone the question and then listening, just the power of listening to someone, just to find out what's going on for them. Ask, do they have a plan? Most of the time they'll say no, it's just the thought. We have 65,000 people that think about it every year. But just having the space and giving that person the time. And I think the prevention is a huge part of this. So education, educating people that it's just a conversation, but it's a life-saving conversation. And we all know, are you okay day? Everyone says, are you okay? It should be, are you okay day every day? And people have those skills. But if someone's not okay, it doesn't mean that you're responsible. It just means you've asked them the question. You can sit with them, and then you can move them, get someone in who can support them, the professionals. And there's plenty of us in the room today that now know where we can refer. So we've got the prevention, we've got the education. We also know that when someone's discharged from hospital, it's that first 3 weeks after their discharge where they're at really high risk of suicide. So it's having someone who is on the ground and can support that person until they're linked in. It can take 6 weeks sometimes to see a psychologist. And we all know a psychologist is a bit like a hairdresser. Ladies, if you don't get the right one, you keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. So having just that aftercare support is so important, because most people who are thinking about suicide, we find on the crisis line, they're lonely. Now you can be in a room full of people and still be lonely. You don't have to be physically disconnected. It's how you feel inside. So just having someone there that they can talk to, just to bridge that gap until they can access the support that they're comfortable with. The other side of this, of course, is the suicide bereavement support group. When someone takes their life to suicide, the risk for the people behind goes up through the roof. Making sure that they access those supports and there's someone there to keep them safe. And quite often, people who've lost someone to suicide, I always call it when you lose someone to suicide, you don't get a hot pot. If you lose someone to cancer or a heart attack or a car accident, people get flowers, people call in, and time again we hear when someone's lost someone to suicide, they become quite isolated because people don't know what to say. So having that group gives them that safe place where they can share. They can share their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences, and not be judged. And there's no stigma in the room, because there is still a huge stigma with suicide, and that's the other thing that we need to break down as a community. It's not okay it is okay to not be okay, and to put your hand up and say you need support, especially our men. We're losing too many of our men, and we're losing too many of our youth.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's interesting, often when I'm hearing the media cover suicide and referencing it to committing suicide, and they still do that, and of course that relates to it being a crime, which of course, you know, you're committing a crime in taking your own life, so that, which is part of the stigma, isn't it?
Huge part.
So changing the language, literally changing the language, can really help to remove that. Oh, and he committed suicide. No, he took his own life, or she took their own life, and it just sways us in the interpretation. And it was interesting, I was hearing some regional and rural people talking about how some boys, when they were contemplating killing themselves, and actually would do it in a car accident, because then it looks like you have a car accident, and your family has less stigma than if you'd killed yourself. Isn't that terrible? So thank you for sharing that with us. All right, now I've got Chris. Well, Chris and Alessandra, do you mind if I ask you, because you both had to go, as talk, and I just want to, I mean, Simone, we've got to wait till she's ready. So you just take your time there. And Renee, how about we go with you? And then, is that all right with you, Chris? If we just... So Renee's question is, a number of people across the region having ongoing and complex mental health issues. What type of support is available, and how is support maintained? And how do services work together to meet the needs of this group?
Okay, so thank you. I suppose one of the things that is significant to be aware of is that traditionally, the people that we're talking about are probably the most vulnerable group of people when we're talking about mental health. We're talking about a clientele group who have got severe, significant symptoms, who have typically been pushed from organisation or service to service, or have been, their needs have been left unmet. Most of our homeless people are these clients that we're talking about. They struggle to keep jobs, they struggle to have homes, they struggle to keep connection with family and connection with community. They are our vulnerable. And unfortunately, in the past, traditionally, they found it very difficult to access services, and the funding has never been sufficient enough to support them adequately. What I love about this reform, and what excites me about this reform, is that the STEP mental health model will allow for people to get services commensurate to need, and allow people to be plugged into those services from the minute that they're referred in. And that is very new, because normally you're wanting clients or consumers to fit in to the service scope, rather than the service fitting into what the client needs. So that's an exciting thing, and as a mental health nurse who's worked with severe and persistent mental illness for a very, very long time, I'm very excited about that, and for our vulnerable people's voices are being heard. There's still a lot to go. There's still a lot of funding to be had, to be sourced, to be advocated upon, so it's not finished yet. Their voice still needs support. But what is great is that we've been able to remodel services so that each of the local government areas that South West Sydney now has a specialist provider, clinician, that will be able to support other organisations with their clients, or support carers with their loved ones, or support clients to receive the services that they need, or to be linked into the services that they need. There's a variety of different things coming out. So we've got the credentialed mental health nursing services in each local government area. We're all trying to work out the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It is a forever jigsaw puzzle that every time I think I've got it unlocked, there is another thing to unlock. But I think once it has lived its life for a couple of years, it will be a clearer process. It's just very messy because they're developing it or they're moving it. It's a moving feast as people go. So from a service perspective, my first advice is that ring the 1300 number. The PHN has spent a lot of time in setting up a clinical intake line that will enable you to help navigate the service structure. You've all heard a lot of information about all the various services that are available. You still walk away, I can imagine I would, you would still walk away going, oh, hang on, which one was it again for that if they only need a couple of sessions and they can do it by phone, which is the one for the ones that are really needing a lot of support for a long, long time? Where do I plug them in? Ring the 1300 number. Don't have the headache, because it can be cleared up very quickly, especially as a referring agency. For the credentialed mental health nursing service, or for those that have got severe and persistent mental illness, the beautiful thing with this program is clients or consumers can be seen as often as you need, for as long as you need, with the notion that that person is being supported on a recovery journey, not to be recovered, but towards what is meaningful for them when we talk about recovery. So it's a lovely new focus. It's and it's a service that is now more accessible and more available. Partners in Recovery is still available in the area. It will be transitioned into the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and it's another service that's there that supports clients or consumers with severe and persistent mental illness. So it's great. It's all of a sudden we've got a variety of different services that are there that we didn't know about before, and there's also the state-funded tertiary services that are available for those who then tip into the more high at-risk acute need. So, and the thing with the step care and the way the PHN is setting this up is that all of those steps will interweave, and people will be supported to step up and then to step down. I will throw a challenge. I will throw a challenge to everybody here in this room, is to think about how you would step somebody up, and then how would you actually step somebody down? Because we don't need to keep people sick, and we don't need to keep people in a level of care that they don't need to be in. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful relief when a client is told, I'm going to step you down now to this service because I don't think you're so at need anymore. You've actually achieved so much. It's a wonderful message to be giving people. So my challenge to everybody now, I think now that we understand step mental health and we've got all these wonderful services in there, is how do we do the interplay of stepping up, which I think is a little bit easier, but stepping down and supporting people to embrace their recovery and their improvements and their health. So that's
Thank you, great. Simone.
Thank you.
Ready? Your question is a short one, yet important. How can people be empowered to better manage an emerging problem or intervene earlier before it becomes problematic?
Thank you. I am ready. I'd like to ask you all a question before I start. Who here has ever experienced stress, anxiety or depression? And the symptoms that you would feel, maybe racing heart, headaches, confusion, fuzzy head, you might be having a few more wines at night time. There might be low mood, unable to get out of bed, avoidance, making excuses. We can see that these symptoms are something that we can all relate to. So early intervention is really about empowering you, getting control over these things that eventually cannot be all-consuming. And that's why early intervention for us, you and me, is so important. It sits differently from other programs within the mental health system. To access early intervention, you don't need to go and see a GP, you don't need a diagnosis, you don't need to have a mental health treatment plan. To access New Access, which is a wonderful initiative through the Primary Health Network, it's a matter of ringing a 1-800 number, and you can do that. You can ring and you can say, I'm not sleeping and it's starting to cause me issues at work. I'm avoiding things at work. Work is becoming too much for me. Family situations are becoming too much for me. Everything becomes it's just out of control. I'm not cleaning my house anymore. I'm not able to relate to my partner. I'm fighting. And you can ring up and you talk to the intake officer and they can book you in with a session to empower you to get control. And that's what we want, don't we? We all want to get control back over our lives and have satisfaction. So we'll have a client who comes into the program, they'll be referred in, they'll see their coach, and the coach will develop a tailored plan around that person's problem. And we use the word problem. Quite often in mental health we try to avoid the word problem, don't we? But we develop a problem statement. What is it at the moment that's stopping you from having fulfillment or stopping you from doing whatever it is that you want to do? We then tailor a plan around that individual, and that tailored plan is around providing tools and support so that they can achieve recovery. And we can talk about recovery in early intervention. So what happens there is we will look at that person's thoughts, their feelings and the behaviours. So for instance, my thoughts might be, I can't do that, I can't sit on a panel, I haven't prepared, how am I going to do that? So then what are my behaviours around that? I start maybe getting a sick tummy, might get a headache, might get fuzzy thoughts, which I felt like I had earlier. And so then I have behaviours. What are those behaviours I want to avoid? Oh, someone else can do it. Or someone else, or maybe I need to go and do an important phone call. And so the coach will work with that client and they will understand what their thoughts, their feelings and behaviours are. And they will then help that client to lead recovery. They will walk alongside them. So by walking alongside, again, the individual is empowered because they can go, I did that. I gained control over my thoughts. I gained control over my behaviours. I now can do that I couldn't do beforehand. And that's why early intervention is so important. But we've got to remember, as others on the panel have said, sometimes people need more support. We have had clients who have come to us and said, for the past 20 years, I've had thoughts of suicide. And that's really hard, isn't it, for an individual who doesn't know how to gain control over that. And we can work with them there. But if there is an intent to act upon that, we will step that person up. What else have I got there on my notes? For us, the last thing that we think is really important is to be able to provide individuals with relapse prevention. We don't want them to relapse. We do a short intervention over 6 to 10 weeks. We meet a client weekly and we work on that plan, we measure how they're going, and we'll then revisit that at 1 month and at 6 months. And we want to check in to make sure that they know how to gain control. Sometimes it can be within their relapse prevention, something that they put on their fridge as a reminder. Oh, that's right. When I feel that way, I've got to do this. You've seen other people put rubber bands around their wrist or all sorts of things, but it can just be that little reminder. But that's how we work with a client around early intervention. We empower them, we make it easy to access, and we make sure that we walk alongside them so that they feel that empowerment, that they were able to take control.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very good for a ring-in. Thank you for that. Now, Chris, we had 2 audience questions, which I don't have in front of me. Do you have them with you? Over on the table. Now, can I just ask, the time now, 3:40. So we've got 20 minutes. Thank you for these questions. And also, has anyone had any questions while you're sitting there? No? What about you? Happy face? I mean, you don't look so happy now. You all right? Are you okay? You are. Okay, so you look happy. Anybody had any thoughts while they're sitting here? Like, are any of you thinking, yeah, nice theory, but that's not the actual practice? Or when I tried to do that, it was harder, or there were these blockages? Because this is the time to be talking and, as Alessandra said, sharing what your actual experience is. Because sometimes the theory, or this end of the table, is not actually what your experience is. And it might be a bit awkward for you to comment on that. Yes. Would you want a microphone, or are you happy to yell?
No, yell. Pandora from Partners in Recovery, so Sydney from the Benevolent Society. So my question is around, and I'm sorry to do this, NDIS transition for people with psychosocial disability. So part of our, I guess, reason for being at the moment, we have KPIs around transitioning our client group who are eligible to the scheme, which is terrific in theory. However, I'm wondering if all of these services that have been raised today, and thank you to all the presenters, and I was aware about a lot of them, and it's very encouraging that they're there, particularly where we have declines for access to the scheme, and we need immediate supports in place for one sort of form or another. So I'm wondering whether the NDIS might potentially see the longevity of these new services and those that have been more established as further opportunity, for want of a better word, to
point. You all heard that clearly? Nat, any of you have a...
I can start it off.
Yeah.
Probably want to chime in as well. So,
Thanks, Pandora.
so I think it is a really good question. It's probably a question that's front of mind for a lot of people that regularly work with people experiencing severe mental illness. So I think in regards to the primary mental health reforms, definitely initially wasn't the intention, I guess, to pick up all of what was needed via NDIS. As we heard before, Partners in Recovery is still a big part of transitioning people over to that program, and very much so through care coordination, which we can, there's elements of care coordination that can be provided under the reforms, but obviously our focus is on things like psychological therapies, potentially assisting with gaps with things like consultant psychiatry, which we know is an ongoing issue for a number of people in the area. And again, making sure that people have support throughout that step care continuum. So again, I don't think it's the intention of the department at the moment, by virtue of having the reform services. Again, to pick up the slack there from the NDIS, they're two, I guess, concurrent conversations. But I think what I hope that we have done, and previously being someone that's worked for the Partners in Recovery program for a number of years, I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on what are the major unmet needs. Happen to know that unmet needs around clinical services and inappropriate clinical services are right at the top of that list. So that's something that we can actually do something about. And like I mentioned before, we do have a proposal out at the moment for tailored psychological therapies combining individual, group and peer responses for that group. So Renee, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Sure. I agree there's a lot of fear around the NDIS, and there's been a lot of barriers for people to access or be accepted into the program. One thing that is very true is probably 1/3, if you're lucky, 1/3 of current clients under Partners in Recovery, that would be your typical clientele, would be eligible for NDIS. So therefore you sit there and say, well, hang on, Partners in Recovery is winding down. What happens to those other clients? And I think this is where it's really important to start, and with the credentialed mental health nurses as well, and then with the more severe and persistent money as it comes out, because I actually believe it's going to be more money. As Ian Hickey was saying this morning, this is just the beginning. Now, the mental health nurse reform and the change from the MINIP program to what it is now is just in its infancy, and it's just commencing. And I think that at the end of this financial year, we'll see more pockets of money happening if that is done well. And it's equitable, and it's redistributed, and it's accessible. They're the three things that were the issue with that program. So I really think there will be more money, and I think it will be to answer that gap particularly. It may not be around mental health nursing, but I think it will be around severe and persistent mental illness, and about being able to fund clinicians in that space to help with that group, yeah? I think also we need to be a little bit more innovative in relation to how we work with people with severe and persistent mental illness, and because there's a lot of hesitancy from clinicians to say that as peer support workforce aren't necessarily credentialed sufficiently to be able to care for people with severe and persistent mental illness, and I would challenge that notion. And I think we need to be understanding of what we can and can't do, and I think we need to be a little bit more welcoming about other workforce that can provide care, volunteers, FAMs, etc., that can provide the support for this clientele group, and they do a very good job at it. So I would be suggesting that from a severe and persistent mental illness environment, it would be good to have another working party to come back and look at where are the gaps now, what needs to happen, what are the other workforces out there, how can we support each other and work more collaboratively. I mean, virtual team, we can do this in the current. Now we've got internet, we've all got phones, we've got accessibility. We can actually work virtually. We don't have to be funded from the same organisation and working from the same office. We actually should now, commissioning is over, we should all be playing nicely in the sandpit and work really well together. Yeah.
Anybody else got an opinion on that one? Happy to move to the next question. Okay, thank you, Renee. This is messy writing. I can't can't read the first word. Did you write this?
But I
Do you
think it's the
think
one
those
that
first
just
ones are? Thank you very much. Can the time purchasing model bring bulk billing psychiatrists to the Macarthur area? Does anyone want to own that question? See two people smiling, you pretending it's your question. I put my hand up, it's a very good question. Okay, who wants to take that one?
Yeah, we can start it off.
Sure.
So the issue with availability of psychiatry, bulk billing and consultant psychiatry is I guess one that the PHN's had its eye on since the reform started, and like I said, throughout the lifetime of Partners in Recovery as well. So it's probably one that's familiar to most here, is that probably the greater percentage of the psychiatrists are located towards the inner city. So some of the potential sort of ideas have come up around telemedicine, and again models similar to Sarah. Sorry to put you on the spot here, but Western Sydney have actually got a fantastic model that we're really intrigued by. That enables a psychiatrist to work with 10 practices around the area to really hone in on GPs that need support to work with people with severe and persistent mental illness. So I think for us it's balancing the concept of an idea like that and then combining it with potential projects like the one, if anyone went along to Pritika's presentation today for the Integrated Mental Health Service. Again, we see great crossover there between a subspecialty clinic for general practice, consultant psychiatry, mental health nursing, and potentially psychological therapies for severe. So, I mean, if you put all those things together, it makes a pretty compelling case for basically scaffolding to support people with severe mental illness in a clinical setting. And again, that's the work ahead of us, I guess, for the next couple of years of the PHN. But without being too wedded or committed to anything sort of here on the spot, that's definitely kind of our intentions of where we plan to head. Did you have anything else?
There are, I think bulk billing psychiatry has been an issue everywhere except for in the CBD area. So it's been, from a national perspective, everywhere that I've worked as an Australian company, it continues to be an issue. I think also, once again, it's about trying to embrace technology and look at other ways in which we can do this. There are many psychiatry groups that are emerging to embrace that. And I know we work with one that is doing a lot of telepsychiatry, and we'll work with the GP and yourself as clinicians to do assessments and provide treatment plans and provide secondary consultation. So I'm happy to pass that on if anyone wants to know who they are. But yeah, they are emerging, and I think this space will get bigger and better. But telepsychiatry is really starting to be the forefront to be able to address all those needs.
Thank you. Anybody else down? You guys? Okay. Now the next question. Now I'm going to leave the name of the psychiatrist out here because I don't want to mispronounce it. Canadian psychiatrist spoke recently at the MHS, is that right? Spoke about two eye-seeing health practices, those that included Western and Aboriginal health services. How is the integrated primary health model incorporating Aboriginal health and wellbeing? Who would like to answer that one?
Take that. Again, I'll start off, so if anyone else wants to chime in. So I think the short answer to that is that we're very much led by the Aboriginal organisations in the area whose focuses are very squarely on health. So services like Thorough Aboriginal Corporation and Gandagara, Maramali, to name a few, really sort of show us what social and emotional wellbeing should consist of in an area, give us some very clear priorities to work on. But again, we want to make sure that that's an ongoing sort of two-way dialogue. And again, we're very much open to listening and being led by the innovation of those services. So it is an ongoing conversation with those services, which should hopefully lead to a variety of approaches. Most people would have heard Josh mention this morning that there has been, unfortunately, suicides in the local area in the Aboriginal community. So again, that's one that we're very keen to work with those services on developing an approach, and I know that the LHD have been part of those discussions as well, and have been very much a support to those communities, as those discussions progress.
Great, thanks Chris. Simone?
I know within the low intensity space, we've done a lot in one of our pilots for Aboriginal people within New Access, and they've really responded well. Some of our learnings though around it was they would much rather face-to-face sessions than over the phone. However, we've been able to look at Skype sessions now in South Australia, where we run the program for regional and remote clients, and so we have a lot of Aboriginal clients who access the program that way. What we find is, even if you go onto YouTube and you type in New Access, type in Brenton, that's one of our Aboriginal clients there who had wonderful recovery from the program. So really, early intervention works well within the Aboriginal community, sometimes as an entry point to come into the health system. So what we find is they don't have linkages with their GPs, and sometimes it's just too hard to access services, or when they need it they want it here and now. So what we found for a small percentage was New Access became the way in, and so we'd work on some of their linkages, and then we would make sure that we're linking them with the right supports to then go on and seek further treatment. So that's another way that systems and services can work well within that step care model.
Thank you, Simone. All right, let's just finish, if it's all right with you, Chris, we'll just finish with one question to everyone. I am really interested to hear, in 5 years' time, where do we imagine we're going to be? Is this putting a finger in the dike and stopping it filling? Is it changing things in the long term? Should we work backwards this way? Simone, do you want to go first, and then we'll finish off with Chris here?
5 years' time.
You can choose whatever time frame you want.
Oh look, I like 5 years because I think within mental health we see so many programs come and go, and sometimes it's, you're just getting it started and you're getting that awareness out there, because as you were saying, it's sometimes hard to navigate the mental health system and then the program's gone. I love what this PHN is doing, having a centralised intake and having symposiums, having GP forums, even some of the discussions today to start linking us all and having morning teas to be able to build those connections so that we can break down the barriers for clients and we can make that referral process a lot easier. Within New Access, we're really keen to do that, so come and talk to us as well, because we need to know who you are, what services you have, what's the easiest way to connect. So in 5 years' time, I think under the structure now, we will be a better, well-oiled machine. Your turn.
I think the world in 5 years, if the trend continues, is going to be a lot harder than it is now. I think there's a lot of things that we haven't really experienced yet in a global sense that is going to be really tough for people. And I think there's a lot of issues that young people are taking on more and more themselves nowadays with the access to information, internet, communication and things, that it's just becoming a greater and greater problem. People are more and more worried about what's going on outside their own lives than they are about their own sometimes. And I think it's really hard to account for that. But from what I've seen in my time working with mental health organisations, is that people are willing to be dynamic, they're willing to collaborate, everyone's working for the same thing here, no one's trying to win. It's just about trying to help people move forward, rinse and repeat. And so I think while the future might be challenging, and the present is quite challenging for a lot of people as well, there's a lot of confidence that I have in the people that I've met who are working in this, to keep changing, keep updating, keep learning, and hopefully we'll be able to catch whatever comes at us next.
I think the PHN, Southwestern Sydney PHN, has just put together a brilliant model right across from low right through to people who are thinking of taking their life or who've taken their life. For me, in a perfect world, we'd be a Southwestern Sydney free of suicide in 5 years, which is a huge challenge. But we really need to look if we can break down the stigma and have the open conversations. That's a great start. Our challenge is our population is growing at a rate of knots. We have, a lot of different cultures moving in, so we have to look at the way we deliver our services as well. And also the demand on the services. I think there's about 300 people a month moving in across the hill, which is going to place a huge demand. And as I said earlier, if interest rates go up, I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to be financially distressed. So yeah, 5 years, let's hope we're a southwestern Sydney free of suicide.
5 years' time. So for people with severe and persistent mental illness, I hope that I can imagine that in 5 years' time we still will have a long way to go, to be honest with you. I don't mean to be a sad sack, but I think it's taken a long time to get to where we are, and I think what we're going towards is great, but I still believe that their voice is unheard, and I still believe there needs to be a lot more money thrown into the pot, and I think the services that are currently delivering may need to consider more innovative ways moving forward. So I think this space will continue to be a challenge. As Ian said this morning, you don't want to keep throwing money into a service that's struggling. You want to look at innovation, you want to look at ways of doing it differently that's actually going to work, because it needs to work. I'm not saying what we're doing now isn't, but it needs to do it differently and better. I will continue to throw that challenge out there. So I hope that in 5 years' time we are significantly down the way of good learnings and what we need to do next, and I'm hoping that we have a really good, strong collective voice for this group. From a service organisation, from a service structure, I think that we need to own our understanding of the reforms that come to us, that fund us, that our clients are involved in. And I threw a challenge out this morning to people of whether they had read the review, the mental health review, or the government's response, and there was probably about 5% who had. We need to, as organisations, as clinicians, as welfare workers, we need to understand the reform that affects our clientele group. That way, otherwise we will not be able to remain flexible and adaptable to address it and support our clients through it. So I hope that as the reform continues to change, because it will, things do change, they never stay the same, that we take on our ownership and that we actually embrace it and learn and work with it.
So I'll just finish off by picking up on a few different things that people have said. So one of them is comments that Alessandra and Jackie both made about recognising that we're on the precipice of something really great here in this region and what we've started to build. But there's a bigger demand coming, and there's almost a tsunami of need coming. And the reason being is that if the more we increase, and it's a double-edged sword, it's an interesting double-edged sword, but the more we promote mental health, increase mental health literacy, people put their hand up for support. And if people put their hand up for support and the supports aren't in place, what the answer is there. So I think for the PHN, for everyone in the room, all of us that work together on a regular basis, and this links into what Renee was saying, we need to ensure that we know about the reforms that have been funded, that we know what's available through those reforms, and we know the work to be done. Unless we do that, unless we've got a really clear sense of that, we won't be prepared, and we will go backwards. And that's not a place that any of us want to be. We want to keep on moving forward. So I think I'll just end up by saying probably one of the things that I hope in the next 5 years is that a lot of people in this room are still working in this area, because we're very fortunate in southwestern Sydney to network and support one another the way that we do. I've worked in other areas and it just doesn't happen in the same way. And that's not in a way of saying it to make everyone feel good, because that's obviously the intention as well. But it's the absolute truth. We do network extremely well in this area. We've got each other's back, and we're committed to the cause of moving forward and not backwards. So I'll probably just finish it up there.
Fantastic. Thank you. And let's have a big round of applause for our panel members here. It's known as
Parking.